Welcome back. I'm sure you had a great time in your lab doing some least cost path analysis to plan a pipeline. Last week we left you with settled's GOM data product. We planned some suitability and capability for permitting and rig scheduling. As we discussed, this is a rigid E&P data set, GOM data product. When you're looking for the number of wells in GOM, this set is going to be an exact answer, 54,142. When you're looking for active leases, it's 2,724 leases. Production information, all of it is going to be, an exact answer. Production summary for an area, net production by an operator. This is what I call rigid data. So I wanted to make that clear up front that what we used last week was essentially a full E&P data set with exacting answers. You can use it to run your operations. What we want to talk about today is something we've built at settled called EBIS. It's short for Energy Business Intelligence System. What EBIS does is allows us to aggregate news, investor presentations, financials, and website scrapes of operators and energy companies into a system of record for massive market intelligence. So in this system, not everything will be represented. It's not meant to be that. It's meant to be an overlay. Maybe you could picture it sitting on top of a rigid data set. This data set only contains items that were spoken about. So if you look over here in Arizona and New Mexico, in this area, there are no counties. That's because we've never had any news or investor presentations specify any kind of metric or quantifiable data about this area. Therefore, it's not showing up. On the other hand, you see in the Permian, all these counties are represented, in the Mid-Con, lots of leasehold, pipe, all kinds of information here. We'll get into that later. Essentially, what EBIS does is build a home for orphaned attribution. Things like an operator stating a reserves quantity in the Permian Basin. Where do you put that information today? What spatial feature do you hang that off of? Drilling and completions cost. Someone states that it costs them $6 million to drill and complete a well in the Eagle Ford. Where does that information go besides the top of your head today? Because it definitely doesn't go in the IHS well header. It may go in a news story from IHS, but again, how are thousands of news stories useful to you? At the end of the day, telephone numbers were originally 7 digits because that's sort of the balance of human memory. I can only remember 7 things at once. Highly doubtful you can remember thousands of bullet points from investor presentations and news articles and financials and companies' websites. So what EBIS is doing is just pulling all that together. For another example, Chesapeake may state their production in Grady County, Oklahoma as 80,000 barrels a day. You may realize, yeah, I can go take IHS or Drilling Info production or settled production when we get our onshore U.S. set finalized and total that up and say, okay, well, this data says that Chesapeake produces some number. Maybe it's 60,000 barrels a day, maybe it's 100,000 barrels a day, but it still doesn't match the 80 that Chesapeake specified. And the reason there is totaling on rigid data, you're often saying, show me the production totals for the wells that Chesapeake operates in Grady County, Oklahoma. Whereas when Chesapeake states they have 80,000 barrels a day production in Grady County, Oklahoma, they're actually taking into consideration their working interest. So again, EBIS is simply taking what folks are stating and wrapping it down into actual information attached to the spatial feature called out. So let's take a look at reserves, for example, and let's go find Chesapeake. Yeah, let's just get all of their reserves. So we've got reserves numbers up in Green River, Powder River, excuse me, some Mid-Con, Barnett, East Texas, Haynesville, Cotton Valley, South Texas. So there's 19 records. Things like, this one's saying the whole of Lower 48, they have 11.3 billion barrels of oil equivalent. Where did we get that from? We link directly to the source. So their entire USL 48 portfolio, 11.3 billion barrels. Now let's take a look at another example of EBIS utility. Let's query for a filter for Carrizo leasehold. So there's that answer. We zoom in. See, they've got Appalachian Holdings, DJ Basin, Delaware Basin, and the Permian, Eagle Ford leasehold. Let's zoom into the Eagle Ford leasehold. On some competitors' data sets, pretty expensive leasehold data sets, if you query for Carrizo and look at their South Texas holdings that come up after that query, you may get one little polygon, maybe two, but you're not going to get this swath. And the reason for that is with private land ownership in the United States, things change. Carrizo may lease under a broker's name in order to throw you off their scent. There's various reasons why it's a very difficult endeavor to keep up with private land ownership, especially in an abstract state like Texas. So what we've done in EBIS is say, baseline, we should at least have all of the acreage and pipelines and wells that folks are telling us about. We should spatialize all that. We should digitize it. So what we've done here is we said, okay, for this leasehold, we have various pieces of information, all kinds, lateral length, capex numbers, internal rates of return, number of wells drilled, their break-even numbers, PV10, XPEX, finding and dev cost, just a myriad of information types. We track over 650 information types in EBIS. What I'm looking for in particular right now is where is the slide that shows me that picture. So I'm going to pull a special flag that we have in our data that will tell me just that. So I can go straight to the presentation where this was shown. So right to the slide. So this is the slide that they've shown us. Much better than querying expensive leasehold data sets. This is representational information. I wouldn't consider this to be spatially accurate. It's representationally accurate. I wouldn't run my operations on this. I wouldn't forego a survey because I have these crazy looking polygons that came from here. But I would know that if my acreage is there and there and there, that Carrizo might be a good partner. So it's a different sort of information. Again, it's an overlay to rigid data. Just another example of why EBIS is important. In addition to the map, EBIS offers a Power BI template to help us get to know our basins, plays, the companies operating therein, basically offering better insight into what we call massive market intelligence. So as you can see, we have a main tab here. In the 2 years we've been running this product, we've ramped up quite a bit. We've iterated and improved the product. We have 160,000 plus records over that 2 years. In the last month, we have 9,391. If you looked at that on an ongoing basis, we're closer to 120,000 a year as we move forward, and that's only increasing as we automate more of the record input. We're tracking 2,350 plus companies. So far, we've looked at nearly 14,000 decks, news articles, investor presentations, financial statements, and that has yielded us 12,806 unique areas across the earth that folks have talked about. So again, when somebody talks about the fact that they have drilled a well in Howard County, Texas for $5 million, we associate that $5 million D&C cost with that county. We have, since they didn't provide any other information, we associate it and we let the map and these charts sort that out to tell you that's really in the Permian Basin. Whereas you'd never get that information bite from Google unless you search specifically for those terms. So main page, we got a lot of slicers, companies, areas that have been intersected, the specific mentions, time, over time, where are our records, information types, so production rate is the biggest one. So let's take a look at Permian Basin, for example. This intersect will show us that we have 14,809 records over time for the Permian Basin. RSP Permian has the largest record count with 657 of that 14,809. We have nearly 500 in the last month. We're tracking 306 companies in this area, and we've looked at this many decks and areas. Part of what I want to get across here is if you're looking for acreage in the Permian, our Permian search that we looked for is an intersect search, 14,000 records. Really only 2,100 of those were specifically talking about the Permian. Other records were, or mentions or bullet points were aggregated to other spatial features. So attributed to the Delaware, the Midland Basin, Subbasin, Wolfcamp A. So somebody says they have a drilling cost or an acreage in Wolfcamp A. We associate to exactly what they stated. So there's Howard, Texas, 284 records of the 14,000. So just to prove my point here, if I take only the Permian mentions, that's 2105. A moment ago you saw I had 959. Let's go back to that. 959 acreage records intersecting the Permian area. The USGS geologic province as defined, we have 959 acreage records for that area. Now your Google search would be Permian acreage. So that would be 2105 would be what your return is for just Permian. Your Google search is Permian Basin. You get 2105. 112 of those are acreage. So you've lost 800 records because you're being too specific in a word search. What we're solving for here, and if you're catching my drift, is we're using geospatial to solve this problem. So let's go back to the full Permian. We see that RSP Permian has the most records. But what about out of this 959, these acreage in this area, who has the most records? So it's Matador. Matador has 51 records in this area, acreage records. And we could take a look at those. Simply, I could come over and say, find Matador here, hold down Control, click that, and you see I've got a lot of Matador acreage numbers here, and 9 of them in the last 30 days. 158,000 acres, and we can link directly to the source as seen before. That number is over here. Yeah, as you can tell, everyone reports their information differently. Different formats, different headers, embedded in an image. So that it does require a bit of human interaction to deduce this stuff into quantifiable information, tabular data that's then spatialized. Let's continue looking through the Power BI template. So we have a news tab. recent news. This is stuff that happened in the last 30 days. Last week there was a Mexican bid round, there was a Brazil bid round, and finally there was a BOEM Gulf of Mexico lease sale. Quite a busy week in the end of March 2018. So we've got that news tab. You can filter for any of this stuff, areas, companies. All of these tabs you can filter virtually for the same information. Agreements and projects. This would be your deals, your mergers, acquisitions, your acquisition divestitures. We have a finance tab. That would be your CapEx, your OpEx, your expex, your assets, your debt. We have financial filings. We have linkage directly to the balance sheet and U.S. Energy Corp's latest 10K. Lots of helpful information for users. LOE, G&A. Land, we have acreage held by production, acreage cost. Let's look at Permian Basin, for example. So interestingly, quite a gamut, different $500 an acre Anadarko's claiming in the Delaware Basin. That's pretty outstanding. It goes all the way up to $65,000 an acre in Martin County. So taking a look at that, I'd like to see that myself. So I go over to this record and say, okay, $500 is what you're saying. I don't know if I believe that, but this is where they say it. Average cost for basin position, $500 an acre. So that's quite outstanding. Looking across at G&G details, we have net pay, porosity, permeability, hydrocarbon saturation, GOR, various details, reserves, very important for planning a midstream investment. If you're going to invest $1 billion building a gathering system or a transmission line, you want to know that the source, the production will be maintained over time. Pretty important data set. Drilling, we have everything from drilling cost, lateral lengths reported, frac proppant used, drilling time, frac stages, number of stages. This is important just to understand what's going on out there in the field. Initial production is a good barometer for the birth of the well. Could be 24-hour IP, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day, 6 months, 12 months. Basically helps you forecast the production of the well over time and the economic return. Production, these are production rates assigned to areas. Site and asset details. We got processing capacity for gas plants, storage capacity for tank farms, all kinds of information here. Throughput volume for refineries, refined products volumes, pipelines and transport. We got pipeline cost. Where would you put that attribute today? That's not an attribute I've ever seen in any pipeline set on the market. But we track everything from pipeline cost, capacities, working interest, proposed new lines, permits, under construction, all kinds of attributes about pipe. So how long is it, gathering versus transmission, all of those things. HSC plus, we track earthquakes in Oklahoma and piracy in Somalia, or wartime efforts elsewhere in Syria, anything that could possibly affect oil and gas operations. So next up, we need to take all of this information and use it to determine where we should make a midstream investment. To focus our analysis a bit, we ought to pick a company and study that company's areas to determine where a midstream investment should occur. Probably one of the good examples out there would be a company that has split their midstream assets into an MLP. That first priority is to serve the original operator. Second priority is to make money, perhaps serve the greater good, the greater basin or play. I have in mind Noble and Noble Midstream, so I'll go ahead and filter for that. Out of the 160,000 records in EBIS, 633 are related to Noble Energy and Noble Midstream. Noble Energy has 494. You see we have reserves information, 3P, 1P, dedicated acreage, CapEx numbers, production rates, all kinds of information here. The majority of the records apply to the Denver Basin. That is the Denver-Julesburg Basin, the DJ Basin, as it sounds, right near Denver, Colorado. Permian Basin is a hot topic right now. Eagle Ford, the Gulf of Mexico. Those are all prolific operating areas for Noble Energy. As we look at the news tab, we have 6 entries in the last 30 days. We have an acquisition and divestiture. Looks like Noble Midstream has formed a JV to buy DJ Basin's Saddle Butte pipeline. Take a look at that entry. I paid $625 million for it. It looks like a crude operating system, a crude gathering system that's servicing mainly PDC energy. Could be strategic. It's an interesting purchase, no doubt. Agreements and projects we don't need to look at. It's just going to tell us the same thing. A&D, Saddle Butte pipeline. There's some international A&D in there as well that we're not interested in. Finance, let's take a look at that. Got some filings. If you wanted to, you could come in and look directly at the consolidated balance sheet for Noble, as well as for Noble Midstream. These are very recent 10Ks. Noble Midstream has some throughput volumes down there. That's interesting if you're trying to understand the young company. Moving from there, let's take a look at CapEx. So I see that in the Delaware Basin, Noble is committed to spending $215 million last quarter, 175 as of last quarter in the DJ Basin, and the Eagle Ford is far less. So we got three main areas in which they're focused. Looks like Delaware and DJ are neck and neck. Looking at the land aspects of things, we see that the DJ Basin, they've got 335,000 acres. The Delaware Basin, 118,000 acres. So the DJ Basin is ahead. Take a look at that. There's more acreage. Noble's got a bigger holding in the DJ Basin, even though they've recently sold 30,000 acres to SRC. They still retained 335,000 acres in the DJ Basin. Reserves. Let's take a look, click around. DJ leasehold, 2 billion barrels on the DJ leasehold. Delaware, looks like they called out 1 million barrels one time and 2 billion, a billion barrels one time and 2 billion another time. So let's take a look at that. So this slide pack here is likely newer, and it says 2 billion for Delaware, 2 billion reserves for DJ. As we discussed, 1 billion. This is probably an older slide deck. I must have clicked the wrong. Nope, 1 billion barrels in the heart of the Delaware. This is an older slide deck. This is a 2016 deck. So reserves wise, looking back at the DJ, 2 billion barrels, like we said, that's great. That's a lot of reserves. Next, let's take a look at drilling. So I'm looking straight at over here. We've got DJ Basin 16, DJ leasehold 10. So that's 26 records in the DJ and 12 in the Delaware with 9. So 21, 26 versus 21. It's a Wolf Camp up to 26 all. Got some Eagle Ford stuff here, but looking across here, it's really straightforward. The DJ costs a lot less to drill wells. So in the Wolf Camp, looks like it's $7.5 million. In the DJ Basin, it's $4.15 million on average. That's good. That's good for the DJ Basin. We also have some potential drilling locations. Looking across, we see that the Delaware, they've got 4225 on the shelf. So geologists, geophysicists have looked at that, reservoir engineers. DJ Basin, they've got 3,220 potential drilling locations on the shelf. Great inventory. Looking at production, just to get a feel for what kind of basin we're talking about. the Delaware Basin producing 38,000 BOED, probably mostly crude in the Delaware Basin. It's closer to Corpus Christi and LNG ports, so any gas can either be flared or in this day and age, they're building a lot of new lines to get that gas to port and sell it off to Asia at 4 to 5 times the price of an MCF. In the U.S., it's around $2.50 an MCF, and Asia, it's $9–10 an MCF. In the DJ Basin, however, it's typically been a gas basin in the past. The Wattenberg field has produced a lot of gas, 4 trillion cubic feet cumulative. A lot of players out there have participated in the gas. DCP Midstream owns a large gathering system for that field. But it looks like Noble is going after the oil and NGL side with their production rate in Q4 tapped at 115,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day. Over half of that is oil. Where did we get that information? Right here. So 115,000 barrels a day, more than 55% of it is oil. So that basically to get to the oil and NGLs, some gas is going to come up. One of the problems we have is that there's no flaring allowed in Colorado, whereas in the Permian, our other candidate, the Delaware, there are many options from underground storage caverns to nearby in Mont Belvieu and near the coast, salt domes, to piping it to an LNG facility, compressing it, sending it across the ocean, selling it there, liquefying it, sending it across the ocean, sell it there, to flaring. They have the option of flare. In the DJ Basin, they're further from the coast. There are no underground storage caverns, and there is no flaring. So need to pipe it somewhere. And so that's it's starting to feel like Noble really must start to invest in sort of off-putting that gas elsewhere so that they can start to produce that basin in oil and NGLs like they'd like to. So on the pipeline side, this is probably from the split off where Noble split off its midstream assets to, or Noble split its assets off to Noble Midstream because they're combining the Delaware and the DJ. That's really the only two operating areas for Noble Midstream. Not very helpful, but we'll take a look at the map. So long story short, there's some major players in the DJ Basin. It's looking more and more like that should be the area that we study further. Let's take some next steps. So looking at the map, let's take a look at the Delaware Basin. We have two candidates for Noble. We want to understand where they should invest more midstream dollars. Let's look at the Delaware Basin. A few key points. Yeah, it's crowded. Looks like my cat threw up. There's lots of players, lots of activity. We have IPs all over the place, initial production. We have break-evens numbers. We have agreements and projects happening all across the basin. Reserves numbers, production numbers, finances, HSE, all kinds of information. The darker the area, the more records, the more folks are talking about it. So it's crowded. There's lots of players, lots of activity. There's lots of options to deal with gas. Operators out here can run negative gas prices and still be happy with that. And then again, there's a lot of proposed pipelines coming out of here and going to Corpus Christi to take advantage of the LNG exports. And then not far away in Houston, in this area in southeast Texas, there's a lot of underground storage that can all be piped there as well. So they have a lot of options. And so that leads me to my opinion is that they should focus on the place where there aren't many options, where there's less players, less activity, a well-established old gas field, some fringe activity going on. The main players here are Noble and Anadarko. DCP Midstream has this giant gathering system that served the old core of Wattenberg. But the new sort of new players in the area: Extraction, Bonanza Creek, PDC, SRC, High Point, ARB Midstream, Rimrock Midstream. Lots of new players out here running in these fringes around the edges of Wattenberg, exploring the Codell Niobrara formation. All these developments, most of them seem to be targeting NGLs, crude oil, and to produce them to their potential. Well, these operators need sustainable ways to deal with the less desirable natural gas. So there's a lot of midstream build out that needs to happen to pipe natural gas probably into this system back out to these existing transmission lines. There's a couple proposed transmission lines going to Panhandle of Texas and over to Cushing, Oklahoma. But the crux of it is Noble Midstream probably ought to invest in midstream in this area. You see, there's the Wattenberg core, and you see that a lot of their acreage is out here where there's not any gathering. There's other players, obviously, but as soon as Anadarko, this is Anadarko and this is Noble. They're both in the fringes here. This is part of the Anadarko leasehold, and the majority of the Noble leasehold is out here. As soon as these folks get their gathering systems built out, they're both scrambling to do so. In 2 to 3 years, there should be a large increase in crude and NGL production, and somewhat magically creating a new prolific liquids basin that many folks saw beforehand. Well, thanks again for listening. It has been interesting. I hope that, if nothing else, this long video has taught you more about data aggregation, how we can use geospatial analytics to aggregate previously disjointed data to build yet another tool for analyzing opportunity in oil and gas. Rigid data plus representational data plus scouting data and other sources can often lead to the best objective decision possible. Thanks again.